The ice was not silent. It ticked inside and shifted in its old bones. And when the wind swept the cliff face, it drew from the blue depths a voice like a whale's groan. The keep sat on a high tooth of fused black stone, its shoulders slicked with rime, lanterns hooded along its ramparts as if the towers themselves were wary of being seen by the long white plain. The sky had a low lid, pearl gray and featureless, a day that would never truly dawn, and smoke from the keep's vents went up in thin dark ribbons and turned to white ghosts where the air took it. Iriel woke to that voice, ice turning in its sleep, and lay with her hands flat on the blanket, feeling for a moment the old dream's fading heat. In the dream, a dragon flew over summer lakes, and the water below was scrolled in green and gold, reed beds like braids unraveling. In the dream, her mother was on the shore, her hair a tangled knot of brown shot through with silver, lifting a hand that Iriel could not reach. When the dream thinned to daylight, she swung her feet to the floor and set them onto planks that were warm. The whole keep was warm, always, in a way that made the cold outside seem like a joke told by an unkind uncle. The heat came up through the beds of the floors, and the ribs of the walls from the ventworks tunneled down to some old seam. It smelled faintly of iron and salt and something she had learned to call dragon breath, though the dragons were 2 levels below in the great chambers with their chained doors. She dressed in layers, kirtle and wool, and a heavy overjacket of oiled leather, fastening the toggles with fingers that were not yet steady. The cuff of her sleeve had a tear where she caught it yesterday on the edge of a feed bin, and she ran her nail along it, thinking she might coax a needle and thread from Nissa after breakfast. There were voices in the corridor, Valyrian sharpness softened by northern vowels, and when she stepped out she found 2 of the hearth servants shifting a basket of coals from the brazier. The coals were banked in ash and gave off no more than a hint of their strength. One of the servants, a girl younger than Iriel with hair the color of burnt barley, glanced up and smiled. The other, a man with a scar up his cheek, nodded without wasting words. Iriel said good morning to them in their words and in hers, mixing both languages in the way the keep had taught her. Most of the colonists would never say moro and mean it. They had their own manner of marking the day, the hour, the segments of the wind. But here, at the edge of the world, you borrowed what you needed. The keep borrowed forest and bone from the land and traded iron and salt back to it. The folk borrowed words and traded stories, and everything lent warmth to the next hour. The staircase down to the eyrie had a shallow rise. The dragons hated sudden changes, and the stonemasons who had fused the keep from bedrock had known to lay for them a slope like a hillside. Each footfall spoke with a different note, lower near the heart of the tower, higher toward the outer wall where the stone thinned. At the landing she breathed the old smell, rank fat, hot stone, musk, char, the faint ammoniac sting of droppings, then opened the door into the great chamber. Senrith was awake. He was always awake when she came, no matter that she came early. A red gold eye tracked her and the lid nictitated, clouding then clearing, the pupil narrowing to a blade edge. He lay coiled around the central vent grate where heat rose from the earth's throat, his wings half unfurled to make a tent of thick sailcloth scaled with overlapping plates. At rest he looked smaller to unknowing eyes. She had heard that said by southerners who came seldom and left quickly. He had an old scar along his left flank like a lightning stroke, and the hide there never darkened in the heat, so it shone pale as old ivory. The chain at his foreleg was slack, more rope than chain to look at. The link's fused stone reinforced with fire metal, sunk deep into the column that bore the weight of the tower. Senrith could have broken it, of that she was sure. The chain was more promise than restraint. He kept it on the way a man keeps a talisman at his throat that he has forgotten the meaning of but not the habit. "Morning, Grand Sir," she said, in the ordinary tone of a person greeting another person she respected. She did not click her tongue or scratch the air with her fingers the way some of the handlers did. She had never liked how that looked. He turned his head, slow, considering, and when his nostrils flared she felt heat touch her face as if he had breathed through a veil. She set down the basket, checked that the hinges of the feed bin were unwarped, checked that the trough of melted snow at the wall's foot had not crusted. On her first weeks she had learned that cold moves even inside warm stones. It finds the trickle, the seam, the hairline in the bone. She used the long oaken paddle to stir the water, and it sloshed heavy as oil, steaming. Then she tipped in a bowl of limestone grit for his belly, the way Black Nissa had taught her. Dragons did not chew. They smashed and swallowed, and their fires did the rest. The grit kept their inner furnace from caking and slaking too fast. That was how Nissa had explained it, in words hauled from her family's smithy 2,000 leagues south and swung like hammers to strike sparks here. "Do not clog their fire," Nissa had said. "Keep their heat clean, and they will repay you with their own cleaning." Iriel wrapped rags around her hands, dipped them in whale oil, and approached the foreleg. He let her scrub around the claw, not lifting his foot, but allowing it to ride a little on the oil so the old blood flecks loosened and the scales shone. The hide over the tendon was warm as a stone left by a hearth. She was always careful to keep her body low, to keep her approach within his sight. Dragons did not love Serpri.
Si.
The chamber's other dragon, Little Maraction, though nothing of him was little save his age and his bones, dreamed, head tucked to wing, one hind foot twitching. He had been hatched winter last from a stone black as sin and heavy as guilt. When the egg had cracked, the sound had come like a knucklebone struck on iron, and Iriel had felt the hair lift along her neck. It was not fear or not fear alone. There was a reverence to it that made her want to kneel without knowing why. Afterward, when she went to the quiet prayer room of the northern ward and sat under the blackenbarked branch they had cut from a fallen weirwood and set there for those who needed the feel of old sapwood under their fingers, she found it hard to say what she thanked and what she feared. She finished Senritha's foot and moved along the line of his side, counting ribs with her hand pressed flat, feeling the mild shiver that ran beneath the plates when he drew a long breath. If a dragon was hungry, his ribs spoke to you. If a dragon was sick, his ribs said it first. Senritha's ribs were a song of satisfaction. He had fed well 3 days past when a hornfoot hunter brought a pregnant walrus to trade and walked away with iron knives and a sack of salt. The air had been white with falling frost that day. She had stood on the airy balcony and watched Senrith go out from the sky door, wings beating, the breath of the sea turned into mist under his belly. When he had returned, the slaughter had been efficient, the blood filling the grooves in the floor like dark ink in a stonecutter's letters. "I am here," she murmured, not because he needed telling, but because people did, and she was still part people. He lowered his head then and floated it just above the floor, the same way sometimes he pivoted to address the glass-helmed men who came to tighten the chain's bolt. The plates under his eye were small and close-set, and when she drew the oiled rag along them, they flexed as if sighing. He made a noise like a bellows slumping. She smiled, pleased, and took a stiff bristle brush to lift out the old grit along the lip ridge so it would not crack in the cold. "Does he dote on you?" Nissa's voice came from behind, rough with sleep and laughter. "I leave you an hour and return to find he's turned lapdog." Iriel did not turn her head. "He deigns to suffer me. I'll not insult him, saying he dotes." "Words," Nissa said, and came to stand at her shoulder, hands on hips. "You and your words. It will be the death of you in a land where people measure lives by mittens and meat." She wore a harness of teased leather strung with pockets and loops, tools glinting from them. A long saw with a curved blade for cutting horn, a hammer whose head had frogs of brass beaten along its corners, a little net of iron rings that fit over a dragon's nostrils if one had to keep him snored open in the salt-blown days. She smelled of smoke and mint. "Archon wants you after feed," he said, "the girl with the northern mother, as if he could not remember your name, or as if the mother was sculpture and you the scrap." "Does he want my words too?" Nissa grunted. "He wants you to walk to the library and come back with a roll of paper. That is the Archon's manner. Never walk for yourself where you can send another man's legs. And I suspect he wants your eyes. There's a thing scratched on the wind. We'll see it in the day's drift, or maybe not. But he has glass, and the glass has shown him a smear. They pretend it's nothing, but the glass lies badly." "The glass lit," Iriel said it softly. The glass candle had sat dark as a dead tooth in the Archon's chamber since before she came to the keep. There were stories of glass candles that burned cold and let a man see his enemy's hands as if they rested on his own table. Of that candle she had thought, better a cold, dark thing than a warm, monstrous one. Better a dream of summer lakes than a window into a man's hate. Not lit, Nissa said. He says it shows him a thing when he puts it to his cheek. That may be a lie he tells himself to keep his clever head from cracking of boredom. Or we may be walking this minute in its shadow. She took from the bucket on the floor a handful of pulverized char and salt and ground it together in her palm, the gritty paste good for buffing claws. Hurry your adoring and wash. You can come back and oil Maraction after breakfast. I will not rob you of your treat. Iriel put her forehead to Senritha's cheek to fix him in herself for later, not for him. He had no need of such human tethering. The skin there was dry and warm and smelled faintly of pine resin. When she stepped away, his eye closed briefly, a slow, amused consideration. Then she fled long strides back up the stair, doffing jacket and rag wrappings in a trail to the washroom where the pipes sang. The morning room hummed like a hive of mostly happy bees. There were tables of dark wood polished with fat, benches whose backs showed plate carvings cut by bored men in long winters. A low trough along the far wall gurgled where meltwater went down to the cisterns, and above it windows were set into the stone thick as a man's arm. The glass was cloudy, bubbled with captured air, the panes a gift from the viridal workshops in the old cities far across the sea. A boy with a scar stuck his face to one. His breath made a temporary world that was only a circle big as his palm, and inside that world were moving humans instead of fixed frost. Bread came down the table like passing a song. A crock of fish paste followed it and left its sharp salt in the air. There were soft-boiled eggs set in a tray of hay to keep them from cracking this time of year. Iriel took one of each and a piece of cheese the color of candle fat that had been smoked hard as a nail and chewed with satisfaction. Two boys were arguing in High Valyrian about whose turn it was to muck the pens, and Iriel lifted the egg to hide her smile. One of the boys, Jax H., had the softest hands of any half-grown in the keep and tried to use that as permanent dispensation for muck. The other, Ryler, had become his punishment by friendship. At the end of the table, a cluster of free folk from the Ice River camp were eating split salted cod and spatting in northern words over whose camp had loaned whose spear last. They had beads in their hair of bone and obsidian, and Iriel knew if she spoke with them, she would learn new words for old pain. She liked them, but in the mornings she preferred not to have the shape of hunger let into her head. Jirillian, Archon Nyasar Viridal said from the doorway, making her name sound like a bell struck twice, and the room quieted by a single shadow. He was not a tall man. The glory of him was in his skull, the dome of it smooth as a giant egg and thin hair like white daylight blown over it. His features fine, his mouth pinched from the pressure of his thought. He wore a collar of beaten silver that lapped his throat like a wave. Walk with me. There was no rising on benches when the Archon entered. This was not the green south where he could be carried through a hedge festival, but there was a drawing in. The keep always drew in around him because he carried with him the rumor of far places and the weight of letters. Iriel set down her bread and wiped her fingers and went. Your mother, he said as they stepped into the corridor, came from Bear Island? So she told me, Iriel said. She said the island taught her to hate the sea and love the land and distrust men who said one thing while mean with their hands another. Since then, his smile flickered. Your father, she said the storm took him. Then she took the storm. Ah. He walked 2 steps in silence. Then, you speak our tongue nicely with only the faintest burr of the forest. The forest burr has its usefulness, she said, then wondered if she had sounded insolent. But he only lifted one finger in acknowledgement. He led her up a narrow stair to a room she had not entered since the day. He took her measure with questions and told Nissa she could sleep by the south vent instead of under the outer wall. The room was long as a ship's belly with a window at the far end that faced north. A map covered the left wall, the right way up by the Valyrian reckoning, which meant that the sea lay at the bottom and the land rose like a memory above it. The map had every river marked with blue threads stitched into hide, and every river's name spelled in copper pins. The keep was one small bead set beyond the wall's band of pearl. Little squares carved from bone stood in patterns like knuckle bones left by a god mid-game. There were other things. A glass case with stones, green, black, red. A coil of chain made of some pale metal that did not tarnish. A small casket whose lock was sealed with an impressive wax. A dragon circling a tower. On a table near the window, a candle sat in a cup of black glass. It had never burned. It looked beautiful and malign as a tooth carved from an enemy. The Archon did not go to it. He went to the window. "Do you see anything today that you did not see yesterday?" She stood beside him, shoulder near his shoulder, and let her eyes soften. A soldier looking for a man in a treeline looks for men. A hunter looking for a deer looks for what should not move and yet moves. A northerner looks for the place where the land is not quite as she knows it to be. She did the northerner's work. "The river seam is bright today," she said, pointing with her chin. "A new crack? No, an old one drinking air after the little storm last night. The ravens are flying lower. Perhaps they know snow. And there," he said, tapping the glass. "Do you see what I think I see?" She squinted. A smudge, a knot color sitting where the flat white should be featureless. "A drift," she said. "No." The wind has pushed the drifts away from the hummocks. When wind is from the east, it makes long ribs like a fish. These are not ribs. This is, she paused, the way ice caves make shadows, only there are no caves shown there on the maps. He turned, rested his hips against the window ledge, folded his hands as if to pray, and smiled at his own fingers. "The candle, which refuses to burn for me and thus keeps me properly humble, showed a shape like that when I put it down and forgot to look away. Perhaps it was only the color of my own mood. Perhaps it was my dinner deciding to see what else it could do. But if there is a shadow on the ice that our eyes do not yet understand, then I need a person who has walked across snow and knows the sound of it underfoot. I need that person to stand on the east wall and listen." "I can listen," Iriel said. "I know you can." He glanced at her face as if measuring something. "You are not my sworn. You are neither chain nor bond. If you wish not to look, say, I will not have your death on my collar. Could be nothing more than a trick of light, or it could be a mouth in the ice. And not all mouths speak with tongues." She thought of Senritha's skin under her hands, of Merakshan's lonely sweet snore, of her mother's hair snarled in a winter gale, of the way the fish paste always had a grit of sand in it from the drying stones. Then she thought of the map's little bone squares like people left halfway through a game that no longer interested the player. She did not want to be a small bone and be moved by others' thumbs. "I will look," she said. "I've looked for winter my whole life. Another look will not break my eyes." "Good," the Archon said gently, not like a man hungry for denunciation, but like a man who had kept 3 different kinds of fear in his mouth all night and spat them out one by one. "Take Brother Roken. He is a hound in a man's coat, and when he hears something his whole body tilts. And take a Hornfoot scout. The Hornfoot do not lie to themselves about how far an ankle can go before it snaps." "I'll take Tila, Iriel," he said. "She owes me a story, and payment likes to walk with work." He raised his hands in the way that meant consent given. He turned slightly as if he might speak then of other matters, trade lists, the salt stores, an unreachable petty governor 3 keeps south who had promised men and sent letters instead, but did not. He was good that way, the Archon. Like a flint, he spared his sparks. On the east wall the wind behaved as it wished, which was always a relief, like a bad child doing the mischief you expected and thus allowing you to do your work while he did his. Brother Roken wore his black wool habit tucked into fur boots and looked as if somewhere under his habit there was a second pair of boots, and perhaps a third pair under those. He had the beard all the old watchers had, not because the beard was a badge, but because so many had grown it that it became one. His eyes sat deep under the roof of his brow and peered at the world as if he always expected it to shout. Tila the Hornfoot stood with one bare foot set on the parapet, as if daring the cold to char it. Her foot was calloused like a bark. The horn feet grew such soles by walking where others would not, and the callus grayed like driftwood in a winter sea. Tila had bound her hair back with a strip of walrus hide, and 2 small vertebrae dangled from the strip's end and clicked when she turned her head. "Shadow," she said, having squinted as Iriel had squinted. "A soft one, not wind." Her accent was all bones and river. She cut off endings and made middles do the work. Not wind, Brother Roken agreed, as if pleased that a thing could be not wind in a world where wind was the great author of all. He sniffed with his whole head, not only his nose. No iron there, no salt either. The smoke from last night's cookfires settled along the ravine and then went to sleep. The birds haven't gone to look. That I do not like. The drift is shaped wrong and the dark is not precise, Iriel said, as if the shadow came first and then the snow learned it. Roken said. He leaned forward between the crenels until his beard brushed the ice rim that grew where warm keep met cold air and greened where breath touched it. Do you hear the old bell? There was a rumor here, very faint. Not every ear caught it. It was a sound like two bits of glass being touched together far away. It wove in and out of the wind's voice, and if you sought it too hard, it slipped. Sometimes it meant a crack in the ice was widening. Sometimes it meant nothing. Sometimes it meant a story. I hear it, Tila said bleakly. It's not for us. We can go, we can see. But Bell is not for us. Not for us? Roken said agreeably, and adjusted the strap of the big bone horn slung at his back. Doesn't mean we cannot borrow another man's song. Iriel wrapped her scarf tighter and felt inside herself for the little place where her spirit sat when she was at peace, as a cat curls its tail around its paws. The bell slid under her feet then, or that was how it felt, and she imagined a hollow under the snow, white roof, blue walls, a hollow that glowed with its own hard light. The shadow was not a thing under the snow. It was the snow's answer to something older, something that remembered winter before the wall had a name. She lowered her eyes, let them rest on the line of the horizon where it met the sky like a sword kissing its sheath, and spoke the words low so they would not be sent away by loudness. There is a hollow, she said, a bowl with no lip. The wind cannot stay there and neither can light. We should go at midday when the weak sun will make the world honest. 2 hours, Roken said. I will tell the Archon we need 2 hours. You go tell the Dragon Keeper that if I die, he must not let my bones go into the rendering tub. I want them on the east wall to watch more. Of course, Iriel said, not smiling. Tila's head tipped. You and the Archon, she said to Iriel. He treats you like a tool he likes. He knows you are a tool, but he likes you. Tools don't mind, Iriel said, so long as they're kept oiled and sharpened for their proper use. Tila grunted approval. You know a thing then. Midday has a different color here. It is like a coin turned in a hand. The side you are shown is brighter, but you know the other side remains dulled by fingers. Iriel stood with a pack on her shoulders at the foot of the keep where the main gate was a mouth of fused stone set with 4 rings. The rings had been poured into place when the keep was born and looked impossible to move, but move they did when men put their backs and beasts to the capstans and the gate rose like a curtain and let the cold pour in. 2 of the rings had the stains of old blood. Men had died under them somewhere back in the first years when the architect's calculations had not yet learned what winter meant here. The stains remained even after a decade's washings, as if the cold had memorized their shape and kept writing it. Roken carried the big bone horn, a coil of rope over one shoulder, and a sack with wedges and pitons. Tila carried nothing visible except her knife at her arm, a sliver of obsidian set into an antler hilt. Iriel carried more than both of them combined. A coil of line with a hook at the end to probe for hidden crevasses, a fur hood rolled and tied with a cord, a satchel with flatbread and a wedge of that smoked cheese and 2 lumps of sugar wrapped in cloth, flint and steel, a small bottle of oil and rags because there are problems solved only by fire even here, a heavy bronze whistle that the dragons had been taught to listen for. Over it all she wore her jacket, the leather like waxed wood, and a cloak of sealskin that she had traded for when a crew of shorefinders brought a bale to market. The party going out had 12 men, a dog, and a sledge. The men were keepers, smiths, a few with chains at their throats that meant they owed a debt to the Archon's ledger they were working off with their hands. There was also Dog, called that and nothing else because he was too broad and too blunt to carry more than one sound, who had lost 2 fingers when the sledge rope burned them to the bone in a sudden panicked pull last winter. The dog was called Little Prince and had eyes that went cloudy when he looked at the sea but cleared when he looked at snow. The sledge carried 2 hides and a portable brazier and a wooden framework like a child's toy that kept snow from falling onto the brazier's coals when it was lit. Above, on the east wall, a dragon lifted his head and sniffed. It was Maraction. He had been allowed up like a boy given a brief leave from his lessons and was drunk on the vastness. His thin chest swelled, plates moving like tiles on a roof, and he made a sound that was not a roar. He was too young to spend roars on mere air. It was a questioning hum, almost musical. Senrith did not come to the wall. Senrith did not come out for a snow look. Senrith saved himself. Iriel took her whistle out and touched it to her lips and did not blow. It was a comfort only against her mouth, cool metal that said, "Here is a tool. You have not come empty." As they stepped onto the ice, she felt the old thrill, the little hitch. The keep's warmth stopped at its lip as abruptly as a line a careful hand might draw with a stick in mud. Beyond it was a world that had never known a hearth, never known a cooking fire that was not a blasphemy against itself. The snow was not deep here. The wind had done them a favor, leaving a slick scab over the ice like a nails-thin moon. The dog trotted ahead and stopped to sniff and trotted again. The men put their heads down into the wind and let their legs do the work they were made for. Tila's bare foot went over the ice like a seal sliding on water. There was no falter. Roken walked as if he remembered each footprint the land ever took from him and had come to demand their return. Iriel matched their pace and watched the horizons tilt as if it could tell her secrets. She thought of a story her mother told her when she was small. A thing about a woman who married a winter spirit and learned no song could make a man warm who did not wish to warm. In the story, the winter husband left because she cracked the ice to make a door. The moral her mother gave her was, do not make a door unless you are ready to go through it. They went east first, then north, letting the wind show them where the surface was honest. The dog stopped twice to show them the thin places, places where the snow's tone changed under the pad and sang of tunnels. They probed with the hook and found air under a crust like glass. There were blue flowers of hoarfrost in the hollows, delicate as silk work, impossible not to admire even as you cursed them for their lies. When the shadow came into view, it was not where it had been in the window. It was nearer. Iriel stopped and squinted, the wind taking tear from her eye despite the hood's shelter. The hollow was a rimless bowl, as she had seen in her mind, but it was deeper than she liked. The center went down into a darker blue that was not exactly blue. She looked too long and had to look away. She felt the dog's shoulder press against her calf and put her hand absently to his head, and he leaned harder, as if he had more of himself to give her. Roken uttered one syllable that sounded like a prayer. Tila spat, small and contained. Around them, the men shifted their weight and checked the lay of their ropes the way they checked their belts when a song about a woman began in the evening room. Everyone did what a body does, small habitual things, when it faces a larger thing that must be done. Roken kneeled at the rim and listened with his hand flat on the snow. He breathed slow as if teasing sound from someone shy. Tila edged to the lip with her weight over her good foot and the other set behind like the start of a sprint. Iriel sank to her heels and let her spine rest against the wind so she could see the bowl without falling into it. The bowl's sides were scalloped where drifts had slumped and the wind had lifted them again. In the bowl's belly something lay. She thought at first it was a rock, but no rock had that shape. A curve, not perfect, too many angles, but the curve of a made thing, not a born one. Iron, Roken said without looking up. Iron and black stone. The iron has a taste old as my father's anger. It is not the iron from our stores, and the black stone is not from our keep. Dragonglass, Tila said, very quietly. The shiny black, a big piece, shaped, for the old ones made it. Not you. Iriel frowned. There was dragonglass in every trader's pack. The volcanoes in the far places spat glass the way children spat seeds. The Valyrian stonemasons made the fused stone of the keeps from black stone melted and poured and set with runes. But this was not poured. This had a grain as wood has, a line the eye could follow. It was like iron had thought about being ice and ice had taken the thought for itself. Do we climb in? A man asked, the tone a test of his own daring. No, Roken said, and did not raise his hand. in case raising a hand might be rude and wake something. Not until we know how the sides hold. Not until we sing to it and it sings back with the right note. Tila reached into her hair and pulled a bone bead. She flicked it into the bowl. The sound it made was small and honest. It skittered near the iron/stone thing and lay still, an offering. She nodded once. Sides are fine for a light foot, not for a carrying foot. You want to go down, send the girl. She does not boast, and her breath does not try to be a man's. Iriel glanced at Tila's bare foot with its gray bark and then at her own boots. She blew the thin sigh that meant she had accepted the logic. She rubbed the bronze whistle with her thumb and returned it to her mouth. The Archon would not thank them for being fools. He would also not thank them for coming back with guesses and a poem. Rope, she said. Roken did not argue. He loosened the coil and made the first loop, then looked at Tila. Tila made a different knot. One she had learned climbing on ice, water, and stone that sweated salt, and they used that one. The men drove 3 pitons in a triangle, the hammering sounding indecently loud. As if they had broken a rule they had not been told but should have known. The dog sat down and turned his head away from the bowl as if ashamed. The wind turned for a moment from the east to the north and brought with it a smell that surprised Iriel. Wild fennel. There was no fennel here. There had never been fennel here. She swallowed and did not look at Roken in case he had smelled it too, and told himself it was only a memory his nose had conjured. Tila tied the line around Iriel's waist with a hitch that distributed weight and did not cut into muscle. She grabbed Iriel's wrist once, a quick fierce squeeze, then let go and stepped back as if she had given all the blessings she had and any more would be waste. Iriel went over the rim. The bowl's side was firm underhand. The snow was compacted and rough where the wind had worried it. Her boots found purchase as if the bowl wanted her to come down and be done with it. The light shifted as she went. It always does when you descend from white into deeper white, as if light itself is a thing heavier than air that is dragged to hollows. The iron/stone thing resolved slowly out of its surrounding, the angles finding themselves. Her breath sounded loud. Her heart sounded loud. She concentrated on her 3 points of touch: left hand, right foot, right hand, and then moved cleanly to the next, as she had learned on the keep's practice wall. At the bottom, the air was still. The bowl cut the wind completely. It was like being in a room carved under a hill, only this room had no roof and the sky above was the white of a small blind eye. The iron/stone lay half seen, a black curve under a lens of ice. She shuffled toward it and sank one knee so she could lower her face to the surface and peer through. The ice was old. It had flattened bubbles inside it into elegant ellipses, and her own face came back to her ghosted and spread. There was a mark on the black, a shallow trench like a nail scratch. No, several marks. Writing, not marks left by chance. She put her glove flat on the ice and felt it with her skin and realized her palm had begun to sweat inside the glove as if it knew before she did. Letters, she said, loud enough to send the sound up. Something like letters. Looks like curved cuts, grooves, but not ours. Maybe theirs. She meant the old ones. All Northerners do when they say theirs with their mouths thin. There's iron around it, a frame. The iron is cracked. It flaked when the cold took it. Can you take the ice off it? Roken asked, without leaning so far that his beard went into the bowl. Slowly, slowly, Tila hissed, as if repeating a priest's instruction. Iriel set the pack beside her knee and took out the bottle of oil and the rags. Oil did a good job of telling ice not to cling. She dribbled a line along the place where ice met stone and watched it sink, shining, into the seam. She waited. When she could not bear waiting, she forced herself to wait a little more. Then she took a flat blade from her kit and slipped it into the oiled place and wedged, pressed, lifted. The ice did not crack, peeled. There was a pleasure to it like taking the skin from a fruit without breaking it. Beneath lay black glass scored with grooves. The grooves were shallow and even. She traced one with her finger, gloved. Even the bold do not touch every mystery with their skin, and found it made a loop, then another, and then squared itself off and turned around. It was writing. That was obvious. Now what language it might be and whether any mouth still living remembered it. That was a different bowl. The first groove reminded her of the way the old women gouged patterns for stories into bone, to tell a child what winter had taught them, to make the lessons last longer than the mouth's breath. The second groove was a circle cut by a true hand. She leaned until she could rest her head against her shoulder and let her eye be level with the cut. Ice breathed around her. Someone above coughed. A raven called, far and thin, and another answered it. A ring of frost had begun to grow along the edge of her bronze whistle. The grooves were filled with something. She touched that with the blade's tip and came away with a flake on the metal. It was white rather than clear. It stank faintly of the sea. Not salt, not brine, a cave smell, an old breath. She scraped carefully along a short line until the groove's bottom was visible. The black underneath shone. The letters were not decorative. They were meant to be read. That act, she saw in a flash, should have been done in a warm room with a table and a loaf of bread and a cup of something hot. It should not be done in a bowl under a blind sky. She opened her mouth to ask Roken for the rubbing wax and then closed it because she did not want to take her eyes off the line. She could not say why. She wanted to read it now, here badly, in a gallop. She had never felt that before toward any mark. Her mother had given her words like dear bones. The Archon had handed her letters like small fences to jump. Nissa had put labels in her hand like the tags on a smith's tools. But this drawing in, this hunger, was different. It was like being at the edge of a river where you can hear the water say your name and have to step in because the water has been patient longer than you have been alive. I'm going to make a rubbing, she said. Don't talk to me while I do it. My ears. We won't, Roken said, soft, which told her he had heard in her voice what she had felt in her heart. If he had shouted, then something would have torn. She took out the wax and the vellum, laid the paper over the grooves, pressed, rubbed, moved the wax in small, strong circles. The letters rose dark where the black came up. She worked from left to right and then back to the beginning, and then realized she did not know if their left and right were hers. In the old women's bone scripts, sometimes up was down and sometimes the middle was the beginning, because the story belonged to all directions and refused to choose. This looked more orderly. This looked like a mind that liked steps laid out for feet. She could love that mind one day, she thought without knowing where the thought came from. She could fight that mind too. Done, she said at last, and lifted the paper. She balanced it on her knee and looked at the letters and tried to hear something in them besides the sound of her own name in water. There was the circle, then a forked shape like a trident flattened, then 2 long lines crossed by 3 short ones, then something that looked like a star undone. She frowned. The old stories called the writing of the ones under trees a script like leaf veins. This was not that. This was smooth as shoreline in fair weather. Roken said nothing. He would not push. Tila made a small noise in her throat. I don't know it, Iriel said, and it hurt to say. Not pride, not exactly, but disappointment like a scolding given by a gentle hand. It's not ours. It may be theirs. Again theirs, and again she meant the ones who had gone under hill or into ice. Then bring it up, Roken said. We have eyes up here. We have a candle that is vain and a man who hates being wrong. They will want to see the lie in it or the truth. And if it speaks to you more later, you can come down and listen again. He paused. Be gentle with the whistle. Its ring is talking to the air. I hear it, Iriel said, though she had not heard until he spoke. The bronze had begun to sing the tiniest tone. The one metal makes just before it cracks in a frost if it was ill-forged. But she knew Nissa's work. It would hold. She slid the rubbing into the flat leather book at her chest, and then she looked once more through the ice at the black. It did not look back. She was grateful for that. She rose and found her holds and went up to the rim with her feet not once slipping, though her heart had slid in its cage. When she stood on the level ground again, the wind kissed the sweat at her hairline and turned it to glass. She put her hand to her head and found little beads of ice in her hair. Tila removed them with a sure swift swipe as if ridding a girl's head of lice. The act was intimate and unremarked. This thing, Roken said, looking not at the paper but at her face. Does it call to anyone but you? I think it calls to what we all are, Iriel said, surprising herself by saying so much. which is children. We are children who put our fingers where a serpent has been and say, what a pretty scale. She swallowed. I think we should put it back. I think we should cover it up. I think we should go. But if we leave it here, then the snow will hide it and eat it and give it back to us when we are old or when our children are. Better that we bring it to a room and lay it on a table and say, there. Then we will know if we are playing with a serpent or an old story's bone. Roken nodded, slow, solemn. Practical child, he said, and motioned to the men. It took them an hour to free enough of the black glass to slide ropes under the iron frame. It was heavy as a curse. It protested with small noises the way a wet skin protests when pulled from a log it has frozen to. They worked in turns. Iriel stayed back and watched the men's faces the way she had learned to watching horses when her mother bartered for one from river folk. The face tells you before the mouth does when a beast will kick. One man, Sallow Tom, put his hand flat on the black and snatched it back with a yelp. He spat, embarrassed. Stings. Like saying your name wrong, Tila said. It stings like a word with broken tooth. Gloves, Tom, Roken said mildly, and averted his own eyes from the black as if to give it the courtesy of privacy. They got it under, got it up, got it onto the sledge. Then the world breathed out and the bell changed. Iriel straightened. Little Prince the dog whined and put his head low. Tila's eyes went left so far you could see the white around them. Roken lifted the horn a finger from his shoulder and did not lift it farther, and his other hand went toward the rope as if touching rope would keep him alive. There, Iriel said, because somebody had to say something while the wind decided what word to say next. On the horizon, a line darkened. It was not cloud and not a line of men and not the mouth of a crevasse. The dark came up like the shadow under a bird that is too high to see. The ravens went suddenly to ground, as if remembering something. Then the light changed again, and the dark melted, and the bell went back to its thin glass. Roken exhaled as if he had been holding the entire keep in his lungs. Tila spat again, and this time the spit froze before it hit the snow and hung in a small bead like a charm. We should go, she said. The bell is someone else's bell. We heard enough. Yes, Roken said. Yes, walking home is wisdom and running would be vanity. Walk. They walked. The bell sulked. The wind rose. The Archon's keep stood small and defiant and a little funny, like a dog sitting to face a bull against the white. Iriel took her place on the sledge rope and felt the black's weight through the line in her gloves and thought, I have stolen a tooth from a skull. Or, I have picked up a page from a book I cannot read and am carrying it to a better light. Maraction was on the wall when they came in, yearning, his small narrow head stabbing the air in the direction of the black like a pointer sighting a bird in brush. Senrith was not there. Nissa was, and Dee looked at the sledge with her mouth pulled thin and her stubbornness set like a brick. You brought a trouble, she said, not quite accusing. Her eyes went to Iriel's face and skimmed it the way a finger skims the surface of a pan to taste and know what the soup requires. You brought a thing that will be either sweet or sour and not lukewarm. It is writing, Iriel said. It may be a message, or it may be an old warning carved by a man who wanted someone to die as slowly as he had done. Put it here, Archon Nyasar said behind her. He had appeared like a lantern being uncovered, abrupt but not jarring. Put it on my table. We will see if my old eyes are made for its words. There was a moment when moving the black from sledge to trestles, it slid, fast, too fast, and the iron scraped the fused stone and made a sound like a scream in a small room. Senrith rumbled deep in the airy below as if the sound reached his belly's hang. Maraction twitched his head sideways and knocked his jaw against the merlin. Surprised by the noise, he could not eat. Men swore reflexively in 3 different tongues at once. Then the black lay on the trestles, quiet, cold, heavy as cold does. They washed it. They warmed the room by another 10 degrees, and it let them see more. The letters stood out politely on its surface as if they had waited impatiently and were pleased to be looked at by people with good light. The Archon went for his glass. A circle of clear polished stone set in something like a bone ring, and leaned over the black as a lover leans over a beloved, tender and unbelieving. Not the old tongue, he said. Not ours. It has the flavor of the cities across the sea before the doom. But it is not that, not entirely. It is an uncle to it, perhaps. He glanced at Iriel then, not because she might know and he did not, but because he knew she would bear his not knowing gently. She laid the rubbing beside the original and looked back and forth like a boat to shore and back to the river. A part of the shape of the words, the way they nested and repeated, nibbled at some door in her. The door did not open, but it was very clear to her now that it existed. "I saw the iron frame," she said to the room, to keep it in people's mouths. "The iron has a crack. It may have cracked when whatever lay around this was sucked away. The crack is not old enough to have eaten the whole. We might see more if we lift the frame." "We will not lift the frame," Nissa said at once. "We will not scratch the black. We will not chisel it. We will not warm it too much too fast. We will be good, cautious cowards. When we are careful we do not fail, we merely delay," the Archon said cheerfully, which made Iriel like him a little more. They argued happily then, about oils that lift winter from old things, about glues that do not yet exist but someone will invent to hold an edge. The way people do when fear has been put at a polite distance, and you do not have to go on thinking about the way the bell's tone had changed as if a mouth as wide as sky had yawned. They worked until the light outside had flattened into a single color. The kitchens sent up bowls of thick stew and little cups of hot spirit to float in it. People of the keep came to look. Men who would never hold a pen longer than it takes to sign their names, making time to peer with their eyes close to the surface, their breath fogging the glass. A child whose mother stirred pots with her hair tied back in a rag came and put 2 fingers on the edge of the table and stood on his toes and stared so hard at the writing that he put wrinkles in his forehead that would stay there when he was old. Tila stood like rope at Iriel's back and did not make a sound. Night fell the way it does here. No curtain, no rush, just the sky realizing what time it was and putting on its black shirt. The aurora came subtle and slow, like ink dropped in water. It hung above the wall and drifted to the east like a veil undone. Senrith went out then of his own mind, and when a dragon goes out the keep does not tell him no. He went into the shallow night and made of it a deeper thing, and the people in the rooms of the keep lifted their faces because when a dragon flies it changes the shape of your heart as if a hand had passed across it. Iriel left the Archon's room when her eyes would not focus. She knew she would dream about the black. She did not know whether she wanted that or not. She did not go to her own chamber. She went instead to the prayer room with the cut weirwood branch, sat on the bench with her knees apart and her hands on her thighs, and leaned forward with her head down. She smelled old sap, cold bark, a little trace of tallow from where someone had pressed her head to the wood and left a smear. She said nothing. The old gods do not mind you being without words. They are not like southern saints who require rhyme. "Girl," a voice said, and the air shifted a little. Nissa had come and sat, not close enough to touch her knee, but close enough that the heat that always came off Nissa like banked coals reached Iriel's skin and told her she could not die just because she was tired. "I made a tea." "Of what?" Iriel asked without lifting her head. "Pine needles and a pinch of salt and a spoon of honey. Do not ask me for leaves that do not grow here. Drink what there is." Iriel took the cup she could not see and felt the heat under her fingers and drank. It tasted of clean winter and honey. It picked up her stomach and set it down carefully on its feet and asked politely whether it wanted to go on. Said yes. "Your mother would tell you not to stand where the wind can blow you away," Nissa said. "She would tell you to find a rock and bind yourself to it. Sometimes you are the rock, not the rope." "She told me not to marry a winter spirit," Iriel said, and then wiped her nose on her sleeve and did not apologize. "She told me that making a door is dangerous." "It is," Nissa said, "but it is worse to live in a room with no door. You think you will be warm and fed and safe. But one night smoke will fill the room and then you will wish for a door and there will not be one." They sat. Iriel drank. The aurora moved. Down in the airy Maraxian side a baby sigh and somewhere a man sang a song in a language that had too many words for snow and not enough for love. The song was sad because love and snow share an old bed. The black lay on the Archon's table and made the air hum in the way that metal hums when men go quiet. The candle, unlit, accepted the night as if that were its work. The Archon slept at his desk with his hand on the rubbing. His mouth was slightly open. He looked like a boy waiting for his father to come home. The bell did not ring again that night. The wind did not bring fennel. The ravens flew in a ragged sea north, then curving back and landed at the edge of the vent where heat blew and lifted their wings to dry them as if they had walked all evening in rain. The keep gave itself to sleep the way people do who have worked hard and eaten well. Only the snow stayed awake, because that is its nature, and the thing under the bowl, now on the trestles under human hands, waited with the patience of stone to be read by tongues not yet taught. Morning, if the word is allowed for days that do not warm and do not lengthen, brought with it the free folk from the horn. They were not at the gate banging with the butts of their spears and their stubborn refusals like music. They were at the lower court sitting on their heels, their faces like dried river beds, their women with their knives out for making the first cuts in fish that looked too thin. Tila went to them with Iriel because Tila's shadow would quiet them. A little girl stood with her toes in the muddy snow, bare, showing bravado to people who wore boots and smelted iron as if to say, "I need neither." She had eyes too big for her head and a dirty face. Iriel knelt to her, knowing children will speak to you better if you make them feel taller. "Do you eat?" "Yes," the girl said in their words. "My mother eats when I give her my food." She looked to Tila then, quick, guilty. "She pretends not to, but I know how to tell when things are stolen." "And what did you steal?" "A white stone," the girl said promptly, "from a creek. It has a brown line and I can see a fish inside." Iriel laughed and was ashamed of the sound for how much it felt like warmth when there was not enough warmth. She offered the girl a piece of flatbread and the girl looked at it as if it might be a knife. She took it. She stood looking and then she said, "They say the sleeping ones throw a blanket." She said it like a recital and did not know what it meant. Neither did Iriel. Tila's face went emptier, which was how she got when something went inside her she did not want to share. "What sleeping ones?" Iriel asked, gentle, too gentle maybe for a child of this cold. "All of them," the girl said, as if rebuking her for asking a poor question. "The ones under trees and the ones under water and the ones under the hump of ice like whalebacks. They throw a blanket when they want to hide their faces. Then you should go inside and put fish on the coals and say words." "What words?" The girl shrugged, and her shoulder blades under the rag of her shirt were like knives. "Any words. The ones you have." Tila's hand brushed Iriel's sleeve as if to say, "Do not go deep there, not with a child as rope." "Come," she said, and took Iriel to the fish and cut 2 thin fillets and laid them on the brazier with a carefulness that was almost love. "They will eat and we will tell them to go. The Archon will make a speech and give them salt and then make a second speech about building, and we will gather 3 men to carry stones, and they will be glad to carry stones because it is work. That is the day." Her voice had a dullness that meant she was not looking at fish or salt. She was remembering something no one else could see. "You had that story told to you once?" Iriel said without insisting on hearing it. And Tila nodded, once again rope, letting the wind pull at her but not letting it move her. The Archon did come and make speeches, one short and good, and one longer and meant to soothe his own urge to plan away hunger. And men were found who would carry for meat and women who would sow for salt, and many other useful trades were made. Then the Archon went back to the black with his head still speaking, as if to carry speeches to place them somewhere they would not spoil. "Come," Nissa told Iriel, and led her to the eyrie where Senrith lay on his belly and minded no one. "He will want the flight. The old man has his glass and his words. He will want a dragon. He will not ask. He will stand in his room looking and then come out and stand on the wall and pretend that he is only out for air. We will make it so he does not have to ask. He will want Senrith," Iriel said. "Meraction does not carry the weight of a man's consequences." Nissa grunted as if the thought had put a good taste in her mouth. "When the Archon rides," she said with the ritual emphasis that meant she did not expect to be answered, "he will try to carry all his words with him, and they will make him heavier than he can bear. We will make it so the dragon does not mind." They set the harness, straps that had been shipped from the south and then unmade and remade until they did not cut nor chafe nor bite. Senrith stood patient as an old bull who has learned that his strength is not threatened by letting a girl touch his cheek. The saddle had had 4 different seats removed from it in its history, all by men whose bodies could not be told to sit this way by a saddle made in a city that had never seen ice. The one they used now was narrow under the hips and wide across the back and did not force knees too high. Nissa had made it by what? Hing the way northern men rode horses, the sum of their knowledge, and making the dragon saddle move the way a good horse's back does, giving and taking. When the Archon came, he did not pretend. He spoke to Senrith in the formal way, not to a tool but to a creature who carried fire in his belly as people carry stories. He set his hand on the animal's shoulder and bowed. Then he looked at Iriel and then at the air. He did not look at the black. That showed discipline. "Will you stand on the wall?" he asked, and she knew he meant, "Blow your whistle if I fall." "I will stand," she said, and put the bronze in her mouth. They went up through the sky door, the Archon not a natural rider but not a bad one either. Senrith caught the air like a loaf caught on a peel and was out. The keep grew small in the rear of his eye. He circled once, then climbed. He loved climbing. When he pushed, his hindquarters were like iron forging itself into new shapes. Iriel stood on the east wall with the whistle between her lips and watched the sweep of wing like a scribe watching someone sign a book. The aurora was faint at this hour, a hint of milk. The bell did not ring. The shadow did not darken. Roken came and stood at her left and Tila at her right, and no one spoke. When Senrith came back, he came down as if the air had learned his weight by heart and made room for him. The Archon came to the wall after to stand where they stood and looked like a man who had taken a bite of something and could not decide if it was apple or onion. He smiled with his mouth. "I have seen nothing and tasted a great deal," he said, polite to himself. "I have seen a line that moved and did not move. I have seen a light not of this place. I have seen, perhaps, my candle burn without burning under an ice roof. I have seen my fear and it has looked back. I have decided I am clever. I have decided I am stupid. I have decided both at once. This is not satisfying. Let us read, then. Let us do the easier work, which is to make Mark speak to us." They went to the table. The room smelled of dragon leather and stew and human worry. The glass lay beside the black. The rubbing lay open. The Archon put his finger over the first letter, then the second as a teacher would, and said, "If this is our cousin tongue, then this shape is a sound like ah. This one is a container. This is a number. This is a command." "What command?" Nissa asked. "Make," he said. "No," he squinted. "Unmake. Change. Shape. An old builder's stone," Nissa said. And now her voice was a little reverent, as the smith's would be when a man who worked iron put his hand on a piece of iron 1,000 years older than his forge. A guiding piece, a lesson kept for someone. "Theirs," Tila said, quiet and sure, "not your builders. The ones who wear the night for skin and keep their eyes at the edges of storms. The ones who speak when the bell goes like this." She imitated the bell exactly with her breath, and Roken's shoulders twitched. "We are not prepared," the Archon said to the candle. "We are not prepared, and we think we are, and that is always how a man dies in a good coat." He said it as if he were a little tired of himself, and this admission cheered Iriel more than any promise. She could love a man who knew when to hate his glossy words. She laid her hand on the black's frame and did not flinch when it stung, and she wished again for her mother's voice telling her not to make a door she could not step through. But she had made one, by lifting a black thing out of a bowl of beautiful silence. Now she only wished to step through without making herself ridiculous. When sleep came for her that night, it brought the dream back, but altered, as dreams do when you feed them new meat. The dragon flew over summer lakes, the surface a scroll of green and gold. The reeds wrote poems. But when she looked for her mother on the shore, there was a figure of ice standing where the water met the world, and its hand lifted to her, and she saw that it had a ring engraved around the finger, letters carved into black, a circle, a fork, 2 lines crossed by 3. When she woke, she tasted fennel and snow and an old well's breath in her mouth, and Senrith was awake below, and the candle in the Archon's chamber had not burned, and the bell had rung twice and then forgotten itself, and in the morning a set of small gray footprints would be found under the east wall where no child had trod.